The clerk's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "The father is listed as Nathan Pierce. My husband's name." The room tilted slightly, though I remained perfectly still in the wooden bench near the back. A woman 3 rows ahead shifted in her seat, her hand resting protectively on an infant carrier beside her. Nathan sat 2 rows in front of her, his shoulders rigid beneath his gray suit jacket. He didn't turn around. He didn't flinch. The practiced stillness told me everything. This wasn't a surprise to him. The judge shuffled papers, her reading glasses catching the fluorescent light. I'd followed Nathan here thinking he had a simple court appointment about his late uncle's estate. That's what he'd told me this morning over coffee, standing at the kitchen counter buttering his toast like it was just another ordinary Wednesday. But estate hearings don't require amended birth certificates. They don't require mothers and infant carriers. My grip tightened on my purse strap until my knuckles went white. Heat flooded my chest, spreading up my neck and into my face. Not tears. Not yet. Just pure, crystallized anger that made my vision sharpen instead of blur. Every sound in the courtroom became unnaturally clear. The scratch of the court reporter's fingers on her machine. The rustle of someone's jacket. The tiny whimper from the infant carrier that made my stomach clench. The judge asked if there were any objections to the petition. Nathan's attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, stood and spoke in measured tones about proper notification and legal compliance. My ears rang beneath his words. This had been prepared, filed, scheduled. Nathan had known for weeks, maybe months. And I'd been home folding his laundry, planning our anniversary dinner for next month, living in a marriage that had already ended without my knowledge. I'd been a fool, playing house while my husband built another family entirely. I forced myself to breathe slowly through my nose, counting the seconds. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out. A technique I'd learned in yoga class, back when I thought stress meant difficult clients at work or holiday planning with Nathan's demanding mother. The judge granted the petition. Just like that. A stamp, a signature, legal permanence to Nathan's double life. The woman with the carrier stood carefully, balancing the weight against her hip. She wore a navy dress, simple and modest, the kind you'd wear to something official, something important. She glanced back once, her eyes sweeping the nearly empty courtroom. When her gaze landed on me, confusion flickered across her face. She hadn't expected an audience either. Neither of us was supposed to be here. We were both props in Nathan's carefully constructed lie, players in a show we didn't know we were performing. The reality of that settled over me like ice water. My name is Bianca Hale. I'm 38 years old, and until 17 minutes ago, I believed my marriage was solid. Not perfect but real. Built on 16 years of shared history, joint decisions, and mutual respect. I'm a white American woman who grew up believing that honesty mattered, that vows meant something permanent, that the man who promised to love me wouldn't be capable of this level of deception. Sitting in that courtroom, watching my husband's name be legally attached to another woman's child, I understood that everything I'd trusted had been systematically dismantled behind my back. The foundation I'd been standing on was just painted plywood over empty air. And Nathan had been the one holding the brush, smiling while he worked, kissing me goodbye each morning while building an entirely separate existence. I stayed seated as people filed out, letting them pass. My legs felt uncertain, but my mind was crystallizing into something harder than it had ever been before. The woman with the baby paused at the courtroom door, adjusting the carrier's straps. She looked younger than me, maybe 30. Dark hair pulled into a neat bun, minimal makeup, tired eyes that suggested sleepless nights with a newborn. She glanced back one more time, and our eyes met fully. Fear crossed her face first, then something else. Recognition, maybe. Or guilt. She knew exactly who I was. Had she seen photos in Nathan's wallet before he removed them? Had he described me while explaining why they had to keep their relationship secret? The baby made a soft sound, and she hurried out into the hallway, practically running from my gaze. Nathan had already disappeared, probably out a side exit he'd scouted beforehand. I counted to 30 before standing, giving my knees time to stabilize. The courtroom deputy was organizing files, barely noticing me. Just another random observer in another random hearing. Except nothing about this was random. This was calculated. I'm hidden. The courthouse hallway stretched long and bright, afternoon sun streaming through tall windows that overlooked the parking lot below. Nathan was nowhere visible. I checked the men's room entrance from a distance, then the elevator bank. He'd left without a word, without acknowledging my existence, without even the courtesy of a guilty glance in my direction. Of course he had. In his mind, I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to know. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside alone, watching the numbers descend while my reflection stared back at me from the polished metal doors. A woman who looked remarkably calm. Hair neat, blouse unwrinkled, expression neutral. Inside, something was burning through my chest like acid, eating away at everything I'd believed about my life. But outside I looked like someone who'd just observed a routine legal proceeding. But let him think I didn't come. Let him believe his secret was still safe. The drive home took 23 minutes through familiar streets that suddenly felt like stage sets. Our neighborhood looked exactly the same. Mrs. Patterson was watering her roses, waving as I drove past. The Goldman's dog barked from behind their fence, tail wagging at the familiar car. My house, the house Nathan and I bought 12 years ago after saving for 3 years, sat peacefully at the end of the cul-de-sac with its blue shutters and maintained lawn. I parked in the driveway instead of the garage, something I never did. Small deviation. The first of many. Inside, the house smelled like the cinnamon candle I'd lit that morning before leaving for what I'd thought was a normal workday. Nathan's coffee mug sat in the sink where he'd left it, a brown ring staining the white ceramic. The newspaper was folded neatly on the counter, half-read. Everything normal. Everything false. I set my purse down carefully and walked to the filing cabinet in the home office we shared. The filing cabinet was organized the way I'd always kept it, alphabetically labeled and color-coded. Tax documents, insurance policies, mortgage papers, each in labeled folders that made our adult life feel manageable and controlled. I pulled the insurance file first, my hand steady now. Our health coverage through Nathan's employer showed a recent dependent update. I'd missed it in the last statement, assuming it was a clerical error when I'd glanced at it weeks ago while filing papers. But now I looked closer, reading every line with new eyes. Dependent added 9 months ago. Not me. Not a family member I recognized. Someone new. Female. Birth date indicating an adult, not a child. I photographed every page with my phone, my movements mechanical and precise. Next came the tax folder. Last year's return showed nothing unusual, just our combined income and standard deductions. This year's wouldn't be filed for months, but I wondered what Nathan planned to do about his new dependent situation. Wondered how long he'd thought he could hide this. A credit monitoring alert on my phone caught my attention while I was still standing at the filing cabinet. I'd signed up for it years ago after a data breach at my dentist's office, but rarely paid attention to the notifications beyond the monthly summary. This one showed a new inquiry from 2 weeks ago. Rental application. I logged into the full credit report, scrolling through the details with my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. Nathan had applied for a lease at an address across town, in a neighborhood I'd never had any reason to visit. He'd listed himself as unmarried. Annual income matched his salary exactly, but the application showed only one occupant. No mention of me, our house, our shared life, our 16 years together. He'd created a completely separate existence, documented and official, where I simply didn't exist. I sat at the kitchen table, the late afternoon sun slanting across the wood surface, and let that truth settle fully into my bones. This wasn't just an affair. This was an alternate reality. Nathan came home at 6:15, exactly when he always did on Wednesdays. I heard his key in the lock, his footsteps in the hallway, the soft thud of his briefcase hitting the bench by the door where he always left it. He walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie with one hand, and smiled at me. actually smiled. Like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just legally acknowledged fathering another woman's child 4 hours earlier. I was chopping vegetables for a salad I had no intention of eating, needing something to do with my hands that looked normal. The knife felt significant in my hand, the weight of it somehow comforting, but I kept my movements normal and steady. He kissed my cheek, a routine gesture performed thousands of times over 16 years, then opened the refrigerator for a beer. We exchanged maybe 12 words. How was your day? Fine, yours. Long but productive. Need anything? No, I'm good. Each word felt like a stone I was collecting, saving for later. He moved through the house like always. The attorney's office was downtown, tucked between a coffee shop that was already busy despite the early hour and a tax preparation service with faded signs in the window. I'd found her online at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, researching divorce lawyers with excellent ratings in complex asset cases and high-conflict situations. Her name was Victoria Brennan, and she'd agreed to see me first thing the next morning, squeezing me in before her regular appointments. Her office was small but organized, law books lining one wall, framed credentials on another, a large desk covered in neat stacks of files. She was maybe 50, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and silver hair cut in a precise bob. I told her everything. The courtroom, the birth certificate, the rental application, the insurance dependent, the 16 years of marriage I'd thought were real. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in neat handwriting that filled 3 legal pad pages. Halfway through, she stopped writing and looked directly at me. He assumed you wouldn't challenge this. Through Victoria's legal channels and a private investigator she recommended, a retired police detective named Paul who specialized in domestic cases, I learned the other woman's name was Simone Wright. 29 years old, worked as a dental hygienist at a practice near Nathan's office building. Met him at a professional conference 18 months ago when Nathan had told me he was attending a mandatory engineering symposium. She'd been told Nathan was divorced, that his marriage had ended badly 2 years earlier. He'd shown her an apartment he claimed was his permanent residence, introduced her to carefully selected friends who played along with the story, even taken her to restaurants far enough from our neighborhood that running into someone we knew was statistically unlikely. Simone hadn't known I existed until recently, until the birth certificate filing made things complicated. Victoria showed me a carefully worded letter her investigator had received from Simone's own attorney. Simone was furious. She'd been promised marriage, stability, a future with the baby. Instead she'd gotten a liar who'd disappeared the moment fatherhood became legally documented. The baby's birth certificate hadn't been filed immediately because Nathan had requested delays, claiming he needed time to secure better health insurance through his employer, better financial stability for child support obligations. What he'd really needed was time to rearrange assets, to shift money into accounts I couldn't easily trace, to protect himself from the eventual discovery he knew was coming. The investigator Paul discovered this through careful examination of court records and communications with the county clerk's office. The birth happened 7 months ago, according to the baby's date of birth on the amended certificate. The certificate filing happened yesterday, in the hearing I'd accidentally witnessed. 5 months of legal delays while Nathan played chess with other people's lives, moving pieces around the board while we all remained unaware we were even in the game. But delays create paper trails. Requests, emails, documentation. Every request Nathan had made to postpone the filing was documented in official records. Every excuse was catalogued. And every excuse revealed consciousness of guilt, awareness that what he was doing was wrong. Bank statements revealed a pattern that would have been obvious if I'd been looking for it, if I hadn't trusted completely. Monthly transfers to an account I didn't recognize, usually around $1,500, always on the first of the month like clockwork. Large cash withdrawals on dates I could now match to times Nathan claimed he was working late or traveling for business conferences. Credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to, stores I'd never shopped at, a baby furniture store called Tiny Treasures that made my stomach turn when I saw the charges totaling nearly $3,000. Each transaction told the same story. Confidence. Arrogance. A man who believed consequences were for other people, that he was smart enough to maintain two complete lives indefinitely. He'd gotten sloppy near the end, probably because Simone was pressuring him about the birth certificate, about making their relationship legally recognized, about the baby having a father on official documents. The sloppiness would destroy him. Victoria assembled everything into a file that grew thicker each day. She didn't smile much, but when she reviewed Nathan's financial trail, something close to satisfaction crossed her face. Nathan finally asked if we could talk. It was Friday evening, 3 days after the courthouse, after 3 nights of him coming home to find me distant and quiet. He'd been increasingly nervous, checking his phone constantly, staying up late in his office with the door closed, having whispered conversations that ended abruptly when I walked past. Now he stood in the kitchen doorway, his expression carefully arranged into something resembling concern, like he was genuinely worried about our relationship. "I feel like there's distance between us," he said, his voice soft and uncertain. "Like you're upset about something but won't tell me what it is." I was washing dishes, my hands in warm soapy water, my back to him so he couldn't see my face. I took my time rinsing a plate before turning around, drying my hands on a towel. "I'm fine," I said, my voice neutral. "Just tired from work. The Henderson project is demanding." He nodded, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Maybe we should talk anyway. Clear the air. Make sure we're okay." We sat at the dining room table, the formal one we only used for holidays and special occasions, the one his mother had given us as a wedding present 16 years ago. Nathan had poured wine, lit a candle, tried to create atmosphere like this was a romantic dinner instead of whatever it actually was. He started carefully, talking about stress at work, about feeling disconnected lately, about wanting to make sure our relationship stayed strong through whatever challenges we faced. I listened, my hands folded in my lap, my face neutral and attentive. Then he said it. "I made a mistake." The words hung between us like smoke. Not mistakes, plural. Mistake. Singular. Minimized. Contained. Controllable. He explained that he'd had a brief relationship during a difficult period in our marriage, that it ended months ago, that he regretted it deeply and wanted to rebuild my trust. He never mentioned Simone's name. Never mentioned the baby sleeping in a carrier just yesterday. Never mentioned the birth certificate I'd watched him legally acknowledge. When he finished, I thanked him for his honesty. I said we'd need counseling, but I appreciated him coming forward. His relief was almost pitiful. Simone learned the financial promises Nathan made didn't exist when she tried to access the joint account he'd claimed they shared for the baby's expenses. It was empty. Closed, actually. Nathan had liquidated it the day before the birth certificate hearing, withdrawing $12,000 in cash that had disappeared into accounts we were still trying to trace. Victoria's investigator discovered this through banking contacts and shared it with Simone's attorney, a sharp young woman named Andrea who'd clearly advised her client that documentation was power. Simone's silence broke spectacularly. She filed for child support, demanding accountability not from me but from Nathan. The petition included detailed allegations about Nathan's misrepresentations, his claims of divorce, his promises of financial support that never materialized. She attached emails, text messages, even a recording of Nathan describing his difficult divorce, and asking for patience while his assets were divided fairly. Her attorney had done excellent work. Between Simone's child support petition and my divorce filing, Nathan was about to be buried in legal consequences from 2 different directions. The 2 women he'd lied to were now comparing notes through our attorneys. The temporary financial restrictions were issued on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Nathan's office by a process server who waited patiently while Nathan read through the documents with growing horror. Victoria had requested them as part of the divorce filing, citing evidence of asset dissipation and financial deception spanning 18 months. The judge granted the request after reviewing our documentation, the careful trail of evidence we'd assembled showing systematic attempts to hide money. Nathan's access to our joint accounts was frozen pending full financial discovery. His individual accounts were flagged for monitoring. Large withdrawals or transfers would require court approval. He could access funds for reasonable living expenses, but the days of moving money freely were over. Victoria called me at work to share the news. Her voice professionally neutral but satisfaction evident underneath. "He's going to panic," she said. "Men like Nathan operate on control. Taking that away destabilizes everything." She was right. Nathan called me 17 times that afternoon. Left 11 voicemail messages, each one more frantic than the last. I didn't answer. I was in a meeting, I told him later. Nathan's employer, a mid-sized engineering firm where he'd worked for 9 years and expected to make partner eventually, requested clarification about his dependent coverage within days of the restrictions being issued. The insurance department had flagged discrepancies between his coverage elections and information they'd received from the court system regarding child support obligations and dependent claims. Nathan's personal life was bleeding into his professional reputation, the two worlds he'd kept so carefully separated now collapsing into each other. He'd always been careful about separation, keeping work and home in distinct compartments, never letting clients or colleagues see behind the professional mask. Now those compartments were collapsing. His supervisor called him in for a closed-door meeting that lasted over an hour. I knew about it because Nathan came home ashen-faced, his hands shaking as he poured himself bourbon in the middle of the afternoon, something I'd never seen him do. He didn't offer details, but I could imagine the conversation. Questions about his judgment, his integrity, his ability to handle complex projects when he couldn't handle his personal life. Nathan hired new representation after the temporary financial restrictions hit, finally understanding he was in serious trouble. His first attorney had been for the birth certificate, a family law specialist who handled routine paternity cases and uncontested acknowledgments. This new attorney was supposedly a shark, expensive and aggressive, known for protecting wealthy men in complicated divorces involving hidden assets and mistresses. Nathan met with him for 3 hours at a downtown office with mahogany furniture and intimidating law degrees covering the walls. Then the questions started. The shark needed documentation Nathan couldn't provide cleanly. Where did the money go? Why were accounts closed? What was the timeline of the affair versus the separation attempts? Why had he lied to both women? Nathan's story changed depending on which question was asked, his explanations shifting and contradictory. Records didn't change. They stayed fixed, permanent, contradicting whatever explanation Nathan tried to construct. Victoria received a call from the shark attorney, a feeling-out conversation, attorney to attorney, testing for weakness. She reported that he'd sounded frustrated, even irritated. "Your husband isn't being honest with his own lawyer," she told me. The second hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the birth certificate proceeding I'd accidentally witnessed. This time I attended officially, sitting beside Victoria at the petitioner's table, my presence documented and deliberate. Nathan sat across the aisle with his shark attorney, his face carefully blank, refusing to meet my eyes. The judge reviewed the financial discovery we'd submitted in thick folders organized by category. Bank statements, credit card records, rental applications, insurance documents, the recording of Nathan's kitchen confession, where he'd admitted to the affair while carefully omitting the baby. Simone's child support petition was referenced as related litigation, the two cases clearly connected in the judge's mind. Nathan's attorney tried to argue that the asset freeze was overly restrictive, that Nathan needed access to funds for legitimate expenses and couldn't function under these constraints. Victoria calmly presented evidence of Nathan's systematic asset dissipation and financial deception spanning 18 months. The judge's tone remained neutral throughout, professionally distant and unmoved by either side's arguments. But the ruling wasn't neutral. The financial restrictions stayed in place. Nathan was ordered to provide complete documentation. Friends stopped calling me, and at first I didn't understand why. Then I realized they were calling Nathan instead, and he'd gotten to them first with his carefully constructed version of events. I was unreasonable, vindictive, refusing to work through a simple mistake that could be overcome with counseling and forgiveness. He painted himself as the victim of a brief lapse in judgment, now being punished beyond all proportion to the crime. Some people believed him or wanted to believe him, because the alternative meant confronting uncomfortable truths about deception and betrayal. The dinner invitations dried up. The group chat went quiet. Women I'd considered close friends suddenly had reasons why they couldn't meet for coffee, schedules that were perpetually full. The isolation stung initially, cutting deeper than I'd expected. Then I recognized it as clarification, a sorting mechanism that revealed true character. Real friends, the ones who mattered, asked to hear my side. They listened without interrupting. They looked at the timeline and recognized the deception. But the casual acquaintances, the social circle friends, the couples we'd barbecued with on summer weekends, they chose comfort over truth. The divorce settlement took 4 months to finalize, each week bringing new motions and counter-motions. Victoria had warned me it would be lengthy, that Nathan would fight every point despite the overwhelming evidence, that his attorney would file motion after motion to delay and obstruct in hopes of wearing me down emotionally and financially. She was right. But every delay gave us more time to discover hidden assets Nathan thought he'd concealed. More time for Nathan's lies to contradict each other in depositions and sworn statements. More time for Simone's child support case to establish patterns that supported my claims of systematic deception. In the end, Nathan's own actions defeated him more thoroughly than any legal argument could have. The rental application where he'd claimed to be unmarried. The insurance fraud of adding Simone as a dependent while married to me. The recorded confession in our kitchen where he'd admitted to the affair. The systematic financial deception documented across 18 months of bank statements and credit card charges. The settlement reflected every choice Nathan had made. I kept the house, my retirement accounts, and 70% of our joint assets. Nathan got his car, his personal belongings, and substantial child support obligations. Nathan asked for one final conversation after the settlement was signed and filed with the court, officially ending our 16-year marriage. Closure, he called it in an email sent late at night when he'd probably been drinking. He wanted to meet somewhere neutral, somewhere we could talk privately without attorneys or legal constraints. His email was carefully worded, almost formal, like he was requesting a business meeting rather than a final conversation with the woman he'd betrayed. I showed it to Victoria during our final bill review meeting. She said the decision was mine but advised against it strongly. He wants to control the narrative one last time, she said, leaning back in her office chair. Make you feel guilty or uncertain. Reset the story to one where he's sympathetic, where you're the one who couldn't forgive. I declined without hesitation. Sent a single-line response. I have nothing further to discuss with you. Nathan replied 3 more times over the next week, each message longer and more desperate. He deserved explanation. He needed understanding. Our history meant something and shouldn't end like this. I blocked his email after the 3rd message. Blocked his number. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I walked away with stability, dignity, and my name intact. No contact with Nathan beyond what was legally required through attorneys for final property transfers. No explanations to people who'd chosen his comfortable lie over my difficult truth. I'd sold the house 3 months after the settlement, unable to live in a space so thoroughly contaminated by deception and false memories. My new apartment was smaller but entirely mine, decorated exactly how I wanted without compromise, filled with furniture Nathan had never touched and never would. I heard through former mutual friends that Nathan was struggling. Child support obligations, legal fees that had exceeded $40,000, and the loss of our joint income had forced him into a cramped apartment near his office. Simone had moved to another state with a baby, making visitation complicated and expensive, requiring plane tickets and hotel stays he could barely afford. His career had stalled after the insurance fraud investigation, the expected partnership delayed indefinitely. The confident man who'd believed he could maintain 2 complete lives had discovered that arrogance wasn't protection against consequences. I didn't celebrate his difficulties. I simply didn't think about him at all anymore. He'd lost everything because he'd believed I would accept less than truth, less than respect, less than honesty. I hadn't. And that simple refusal to diminish myself had changed the ending completely. The courtroom clerk's voice still echoed sometimes when I was falling asleep. The father is listed as Nathan Pierce. But now I heard it differently. Not as the moment my world shattered, but as the moment I stopped accepting a life built on lies and started building something real.